What's going on, everybody? I'll wait about 10 seconds for everybody to get into the live stream, and I want to let you know what seems like it's going to be a very big deal when it comes to global relations, terrorism, and really getting to the core of the truth, as everyone knows I love to do. This news is that Egypt, Saudi Arabia, United Arab Emirates, and Bahrain have officially cut ties with Qatar. I know there's multiple pronunciations of it, but I looked it up online. I'm going to go with Qatar. They broke relations with them, which is huge, absolutely huge. And I'm going to tell you some facts about Saudi Arabia and Qatar that I know, and it's going to be interesting because everything that's going on with terrorism, with ISIS, Al-Qaeda, it's a very murky situation because no one knows who's funding who. There's been many reports that, and a lot of them, these ones seemed like they've been confirmed, that most of the 9/11 attackers came from Saudi Arabia. And you also have lots of reports that Saudi Arabia and Qatar have been funding ISIS and Al-Qaeda. There's also been reports from people like Tulsi Gabbard, Congresswoman of Hawaii, and other people that Saudi Arabia and the United States themselves, the actual United States government tax-paying money, has been going to fund terror groups such as Al-Qaeda and ISIS. Being that our last president, they always said, we're trying to overthrow Assad, and we're going to pay these rebels, these moderate rebels. Tulsi Gabbard has alleged multiple times that she's gone to Syria and said there are no moderate rebels, it's only Al-Qaeda and ISIS. And even if there are rebels, they usually get taken over, so all the weapons and money ends up being funneled to terrorists. This is a huge game changer for many reasons, because now I think we're going to start to get to the core of the truth and figure out who's truly funding terrorism. I think it's the age of transparency and the age of the internet, the age of the flow of information. So governments are not being able to hide their secrets anymore. They're not being able to hide who they're funding. And of course, I want to mention that Donald Trump met with Saudi Arabia last week or 2 weeks ago and gave them $100 billion in weapons, which over time will lead to $400 billion in weapons. So it's a massive weapons deal. And as soon as they get that deal, they're like, you know what, Qatar, it's been fun, but you guys are not our allies anymore. And they're citing terrorism. They're saying that terrorism, they're accusing Qatar of funding ISIS and Al-Qaeda. And a lot of people are saying, you know what, that's the pot calling the kettle black, saying, Saudi Arabia, you've been funding ISIS and Qatar. And a lot of people are then saying, well, that's the pot calling that kettle black and that kettle black and that kettle black, because it seems like a lot of the world's governments have been directly or not directly funding terrorism. And to be honest, this would make sense why we have a massive, giant military. ISIS and Al-Qaeda has no air force, apparently, allegedly, and they keep growing and growing somehow, even though we have billions of hundreds of billions of trillions and trillions and trillions of dollars of weapons. How are these terror groups continuing to build and grow and thrive and commit attacks? There's something in the story that's not being added up, because as I say all the time, most news sources are not getting to the core of the truth. Most major news outlets are not journalists anymore. They're more like PR teams who just kind of make it even murkier. A few more facts about Qatar that I know is that the news publication Al Jazeera is based out of Qatar. Their headquarters are in Qatar. So Al Jazeera is in Qatar, and they're now one of the more popular news sources in the world, and even in the United States, they have a very big following. Qatar also funded, Saudi Arabia and Qatar funded Hillary Clinton's campaign. Saudi gave between $5 and $20 million, depending where you read. Qatar gave Bill Clinton a $1 million birthday gift, and it was revealed in the email leak that Hillary Clinton was aware that Qatar and Saudi Arabia funded ISIS. I'm sorry, that Saudi Arabia and Qatar funded ISIS and Al-Qaeda. In the emails it said Hillary Clinton was aware, but then she's getting money from Saudi Arabia, she's getting money from Qatar. Donald Trump goes overseas and gives $100 billion of weapons to Saudi Arabia, when it's now common knowledge that a lot of the terror attacks came from there. And no disrespect to any countries. I actually have some good friends who live in Saudi Arabia that I went to college with, much love to them. But this is a very interesting move because we're going to start to get to the core of what's going on, because no one knows what the F's going on. They're funding terrorists, they're funding terrorists, they're funding terrorists, we're funding terrorists, we're selling them weapons, we're selling them weapons. They're funding terrorists and giving terrorist weapons, and we're giving them weapons, and then they give them to terrorists. What the F is going on? But honestly, I mean, conflict is never good in my opinion, but something like this, I'm very optimistic about. One, I'm optimistic about everything. I think these are the best times to be alive, and honestly, every day is very exciting. I feel like we're in the midst of a real situation here. It's a beautiful time to be alive. But two, also, now these countries that normally, even with Trump's presidency, even though I don't agree or really fully understand with why he gave $100 billion of weapons to Saudi Arabia when they're funding 9/11 terror attacks and ISIS and Al-Qaeda, we're now seeing a rift in the global regime. Before, it was like the news told us everything was pretty in flowers. Our healthcare declined, our wages declined, our rent increased, food increased, gas increased, and everybody's, living a lower quality of lives. Meanwhile, everybody overseas is just functioning, flawlessly. It's like they're getting along with them, they're selling weapons to them, they're selling weapons to them. But now you have Saudi Arabia, Egypt, who there's a great interview, I'll post it again sometime, from the Egypt's president, where it was one of the coolest things I've ever seen in front of Saudi Arabia and the United States and Donald Trump. The Egypt's president said, hey, if you guys want to stop terrorism, you really are really trying to stop terrorism, you guys have to stop funding terrorists. Where are they getting their arms from? Where are they getting their money from? Who's funding terrorists? So much respect to Egypt's president. He said that, bang, right to their faces. So it seems like in this era, the BS is up. The lies are up. People aren't buying them. Other countries aren't buying them. It's only so long you could lie about what's going on with Al-Qaeda and ISIS and Saudi Arabia and Qatar and the U.S. So I'm optimistic about this. I think we're going to start get to the bottom of who's really funding ISIS and Al-Qaeda. Is it Saudi Arabia? Is it Qatar, and that's why they're turning on them? Has it been the United States, and now we have a different president in Donald Trump who's not going to fund terrorism? Is it going to continue under Donald Trump because he's part of the global regime? Is it not part? Who knows? Find out tomorrow on United States and the World, the TV show. That is real life. That's unfolding right now. So we will find out. I can't tell you I know fully what's going on. I keep it as real as I can with you and be honest, and I hold everybody accountable. But this is, in my opinion, this is good because it's going to start to divide the global powers, these people that are just funding terrorists and getting money and exploiting other countries and lying about terrorism and putting everybody at risk, putting Europe at risk, putting the United States at risk. And maybe we'll start to crack to who's funding the terrorists, who's supporting them, who's working with Iran and Qatar and maybe Saudi Arabia, maybe the United States. Who knows? We'll figure it out. But also I want to say that I noticed about this is that, Saudi Arabia is now going to ban Qatar. They're cutting off their ties to them. So is Saudi Arabia, are they implementing a Muslim ban? Is it racist? Is it sexist and xenophobic that they do it? No, for the millionth time, like I said to everybody, regardless of your preference on religion, these are different times in the world right now, in times of turmoil, in times of, uncertainty. Sometimes it's smarter to protect your country, to protect your people. How many things have to happen in England before, I'm not saying to blame anybody, I'm not saying to go wild, but to re-look and reevaluate the situation that's going on in the world and maybe say to ourselves, maybe the politicians I supported aren't who I thought they were. I can do that when Trump makes a deal that I'm like, why would he give Saudi Arabia all this weapons? I'm able to confront it. I'm not just like, this should be perfect. But at the same time, we do have to realize maybe we should implement a temporary ban because these countries are beefing with each other. Saudi Arabia and Qatar, this has not happened in the last couple of years in my lifetime, that they're, going this direct at each other, saying, nah, you have Al Jazeera, like I said, they're a news source that broadcasts to the United States, and now they're, beefing with our allies. It's nothing new. I know we have Russia television. We let all, I think the freedom of flow of information is important, but I definitely want to say I think it's important that in the United States, we need to have an honest conversation. We need to have an honest conversation about terrorism. We need to have an honest conversation about border security. We need to have an honest conversation about the refugee situation, because I've watched many of documentaries of people and stories, and the process, the vetting process of the refugee situation and where they're coming from and who they are, it's not what you think they are. It's not how they paint it on TV. They're like, oh, it's just a bunch of women and children who need your help. In some cases, yes, but in a lot of ways, no. There's a lot of flaws in the refugee situation and the narrative that's being fed to us. So with this, I would say, let's see what happens. Hopefully we can get to the bottom of terrorism. Who's funding what terrorism? Can we stop terrorism? Can we stop blowing each other up? Can we stop selling weapons and destroying, each other's lives? I would hope so. And can we also have a real honest conversation about the refugee situation and what's going on in the world overseas, in England and France and Germany, in Europe, in the Middle East, in Syria, in Yemen, in Iraq, Afghanistan, in Saudi Arabia, in Qatar. And let's have a conversation, because opinions are not going to bring us to peace. False statements and false assumptions of what's going on, that's not going to bring us to peace. What's going to bring us to peace is truth, real dialogue, and getting to the bottom of what's truly going on in our home countries and also overseas, where the narrative has been skewed for far too long. So once again, Egypt, Saudi Arabia, United Arab Emirates, and Bahrain have cut ties with Saudi Arabia. It's breaking news. Let me know what you think. This will unfold over the next 2 weeks, and we'll figure out if this is good, bad, if it's going to help, hurt us, and if it's going to stop or fuel more terrorism. It's uncertain to me at this point. Let me know what you think. Thank you for joining.